Hi everyone, welcome. This is an artist to artist Q&A and studio visit with professional artist Leslie Graff. We have James Reese, art teacher at Provo High School and member of the Springville Museum of Art Board of Trustees here, who's going to moderate this visit as we talk to Leslie about her career and her artwork. So James, do you want to get started?
Let's get started. Leslie, it's so great to have you here. We're so glad you're joining us and be able to talk about your work and share your technique and ideas about your creative direction that you take in your work, and maybe some suggestions for students how they can get started with their own. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, sure. So,
or should I make up things and I could do it? No, you go ahead.
well, okay, so I'm Leslie Graff. I identified that part. I am a visual artist, mostly a painter, I would say. And I do mixed media sometimes, but typically a painter. And I live in Sutton, Massachusetts, so a little bit west of Boston. And I don't know, what else?
That sounds good. And I know, what was that?
I have 3 kids, 3 boys from 19 to 13, so.
Great. And for those of you that are not familiar with Leslie's work, if you get a chance to go into certain areas in the new airport in Salt Lake City, she has 6 paintings up, gracing the walls of the new airport. So really good work. So many people wonder about your artistic journey. So how did you become an artist?
Okay, so my story is very different probably from most artists. I always liked to paint growing up, so that was something I always did. My parents were good about encouraging my creative projects on many fronts. I started taking museum-based lessons, so I'm a big fan of museums because I think that really helped me early on to be exposed to a lot of great art. So I started taking lessons at the St. Louis Art Museum when I was probably in about 5th grade. And I really appreciated that. I appreciated drawing, in amongst the collections and just sort of way it expanded my view of art. And I continued doing art through high school. And then I kind of had to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. And people always say, don't be an artist, right? Like no one will make a living as an artist. And I really loved art, but I wasn't ready to abandon all my other academic interests. So I did not study art when I went to college. I studied education, and I just kind of put it aside and was like, I'll come back to this later. And then I went to graduate school in marriage, family, and human development, and I became a child life specialist. So I work in hospital settings doing therapeutic play, psychological preparation, a lot of things. And art sort of would weave its way into these things, whether it was things in the classroom. When I was in graduate school, my research actually used children's drawings. So it was always kind of there, but it was just a little bit backburnered. And so I was kind of in these other professional arenas. And then at one point I was like, I'm going to pull my paints back out from high school and do some paintings again. So it was literally the paints I had from high school. And I just painted a few things and put them on the walls of our house. And one day someone came over and asked if they could buy one. And I thought, okay. And then that led to doing a show, and that led to the last probably 18 years of painting and where I am now. So it's a little bit different. It was a little bit of an accidental career, but I think for me, I'm really grateful that I had the different educational experiences that I had, because I think they definitely influence my work, the way that I work, the kind of critical thinking skills. That social science background, I think, contributes a lot to the work I create. Like, I know I wouldn't create it without that experience.
Very interesting. And it really gives a nod to having a really good high school experience, because you really anchored your techniques and approaches, the foundation you had to pick up from that. And obviously some of the social, emotional aspects find their way into thematic ties into your work. So that's great.
Every year I send a note to my high school art teacher, like telling her that she can take credit for my art career. So.
Well, good. We know that good high school teachers make a big difference. So how often do you work in the studio? Some of these questions I'm going to ask you came from my students. I asked them, I showed them your work, and I said, generate some questions to ask Leslie Graff. So how often do you work in the studio, and how do you juggle being a mom and a working artist?
Okay, so studio time is probably at least 4 days out of the week, sometimes 5. It's very fluid and it varies a lot. You know, as an artist, you're doing a lot of different things. It's not just creating art all the time. So there's lots of different tasks. But in terms of like painting in the studio, probably at least 4 days a week. It's varied over my life. When my kids were little and all at home, I painted more like during their naps or at night when they went to bed. And as my kids were older and at school, I would paint more when they were at school. Now they're back home because of COVID. Like I find it's very fluid and it shifts around. Sometimes I paint more at night. Sometimes I paint more during the day. I do like having my studio in my home because it lets me shift back and forth a lot, right? I can throw in laundry or throw in dinner and come back and work on a painting. And I like that. Or I can paint till 2 a.m. and then literally walk up to bed. So it's nice to not have to commute to and from another space. So I really like having my studio in my house. I usually take almost the whole summer off because I like to travel and do things with my kids and be really present. So my breaks tend to be in big chunks, but I tend to be pretty consistent through the week.
And another question kind of connects to that. Is it hard to find time to paint often? And here linked with this, I think where they're going, if so, how do you find time to get inspired and then work? So I think maybe the implication is maybe you run out of ideas. How do you keep on going and keep the creative fires kindling?
I think one of the biggest things is getting into the habit of painting, right? Like painting regularly. If you're painting once a month or you're painting once a week, it's a lot harder to get sort of flow and rhythm, and having a designated space where I can kind of just be working on things, having multiple things going at the same time, because for me, there's very different energy to start a painting as to finishing a painting. So I might have 30 minutes, and 30 minutes is not enough time to put first coats on a figure, but 30 minutes may be enough time to work on a pattern in a background or something like that. So I think having different tasks that you can do, different things, related to both your time and your energy. Sometimes you might be a little low energy, but you can still progress a piece, but you might not be like, oh, I'm ready to do super fine details. It's also about having your sketchbook, right? Having lots of ideas so that it's not like, oh, you're sitting down and going, wait, where do I start? That you always have, you know, thoughts and ideas. Anytime you have them, you're sort of capturing them and keeping them, so you can instantly pick back up and find something, even if at that moment, there's not one thing sort of super directing you, because we all go through that. Sometimes you're really hot on an idea, and other times you kind of, you're trying to find your way, or things are still percolating in your mind, but you can kind of just start working.
Okay. Is art your only interest? I think sometimes students think narrowly that an artist, that's all they do is sleep, dream, and do art.
No, and I'm probably one of the most like divergent people. So I have a lot of interests, and art is just one of them. I like designing furniture. I like collecting furniture. I love to cook. I love to bake. I like to travel around the world. What else? I mean, there's a million different things, but it's not just art in my house. In fact, lots of people know me and don't even really know the art side of me, like just know me in other contexts. But yeah, so, and I think that having lots of interests is a really, really good thing, because you bring different things to the table, right? Different ideas, different skills sort of cross-pollinate and create really interesting things in your work. So I think pursuing lots of interests is great. Just like when you're brainstorming, the greater variety of voices you have at the table, the more innovative the things you generate are. And I think it's much the same way. The more interests and sort of diverse experiences you have, the more you can combine those in really interesting ways that even reflects in your art. So
I agree. I think it's important to have a healthy, wide range of interests, and I think they find their way in your work in unexpected way, and also keeps when you're in the studio doing work, it makes it fresh and you're not getting stagnant. If you couldn't be an artist, someone asked, what other job would you have?
well, this is kind of funny given I have had a lot of jobs because this wasn't my only pursuit. So I've been a college professor and a child life specialist, and I've been a floral designer, and I've made celebrity wedding cakes. And I mean, there is actually an article that Forbes did on me a few years ago. High school students, you won't know this. It's like a business magazine. Anyways, but it was about having multiple simultaneous careers. And for me, I love that because I can flip back and forth and I don't get burned out on something. I don't get bored. But there are so many other jobs I would love to have. I always said I would have loved to have been a professional brainstormer, but it wasn't a real job. But then I figured out it was a real job. It was design consulting, only no one ever told me that, but I would have been really good at that. I also had secret desires to be an archaeologist. When we lived in Turkey and I was little, we would go to ancient ruins and I would hide an extra toothbrush in my pocket because I thought at some point I might discover something and need to like turn it off. So I probably could have been 101 different things. There's so many things that I love to do. So, but I would also say, don't be afraid to be more than one thing when you grow up. Like, I don't know why we have this idea that we think I can only do one thing, or if you do more than one thing, you won't do both of them well, right? You can't do them at a professional level. If you're doing like one thing is always lesser. And I don't know why we think that way. And I think we tend to limit ourselves, especially in today's economy and the way that jobs go. I think a lot of people could do a lot of things, and you're kind of happier when you're doing all the things you like. So,
and I think today in our modern environment that having multiple hats that you're wearing is becoming more the norm, right? Or at least changing roles and jobs throughout your lifetime. Of all the art styles or approaches to making art or images, why did you select the one that you have? And I'm just curious if you think there's some parallels with your personality with that.
Let's see. Well, I think I really like clean lines. I like things that tend to be a little bit more minimal or modern. I do love mid-century furniture. You know, I would also say there's an interesting, probably psychological interaction with this. So when I started painting again, you know, years ago, I had 3 kids. My life was kind of crazy. And as I look at my work from then to now, my work has actually gotten tighter or cleaner, which is a little bit interesting. And so I think when my life was a little bit chaotic, art let me create more order. And so it was sort of a way of, like, I noticed that I was like, wow, my work just got tighter, but it was the cleanness of it, right? I really am drawn to clean lines. And, you know, I think there's also stylistic reasons that help to convey the message or do so ironically in my work by having this sort of simplification, the simplification of complexity, right? I like that sort of interaction.
You go in the studio and kind of create order where your life is chaotic.
Right. I mean, my life isn't that chaotic, but just I like that. And, you know, I'm really drawn to the power of especially color used in simplified forms. Like, I really like mid-century illustration of the 50s and 60s. Like, the people were masterful users of color and just composition. And so I'm really drawn to that. So as I sort of found my way into different series and then explored other art that was similar, it probably sort of compounded that sort of instinct or direction. And it works well with my medium. I don't know.
Well, the next question, do you work from photographs, and what is the approach you use in using them in your paintings, and how much work goes into planning and set up photographs? And just to preface this a little bit, to contextualize, as a high school art teacher, I'm always harassing my students to stop stealing images from the internet, stop going to Pinterest and finding other people's inspiration and making their own. So talk a little bit about how much work you put into setting up your sources for your paintings, and if you work from photography, which I assume you do.
Okay, so I do. I'll actually show you some examples of that because it's easier to see. But yes, I work from photographs because these pieces need to have a certain degree of precision or reality, right? I like to have a pretty solid photo reference for my work. So I first start by kind of thinking about what I want for the photo shoot. Then I go ahead and sort of plan out what that will be, usually the outfits, the setting, the different elements that might be in the photo shoot. And then I start on that. So I'll go ahead and share.
That would be fantastic.
Okay, so let's see here. So if we're let me go back. I want this one. Okay, so it might start with me taking 200 pictures, right? That are each a little bit different. And you might think if I was a better photographer, I wouldn't have to take 200 pictures. But as the series started out, it was typically me taking the pictures with my camera on a tripod and using a remote with like a 3-second delay, because I was taking study shots when my kids were taking their naps or things like that, when I had free windows of time. So you're kind of setting up, and then you have to pick through these, what really conveys what I'm trying to say in this piece and what fits within the crop parameters that I'm using. I'm typically painting on a 30 by 40 canvas. So, okay, because I like to have this consistency across the domestic series. And so I have to be really careful about the positioning to keep the compositions strong. So again, in this, you can kind of see how, okay, this was with the chocolate cake. I actually had to make the chocolate cake, right? I got to eat it after, but you have to make cake, but you can see that each image conveys a little bit differently. Or the last image, the larger image, is stronger compositionally, but you kind of don't know that. You're not going to nail that in your very first shot. So you kind of have to take all these shots and then say, oh no, this one has the right energy to it, or whatever that is. But it really is a little bit of trial and error process. And I think too often people sort of cheat on the front end or try to skip on the front end. You're right, like don't plan this out. And then you wind up to more issues later on in the piece. But really getting a good study shot, getting a good composition helps a lot. So if I just went and did this and took 5 pictures, I might do an okay painting. If I take 150 pictures, I'll probably get a much better painting. So I think you kind of, the more you invest in that, often the more you get out of it. And this is another example because I think you often find these interesting things. I had this old TV and I wanted to use it. But the problem was, I'm doing this 30 by 40 crop and I realized I'm pretty tall, like I'm 5'10". By the time I put heels on, I'm probably, 6'1", 6'2". And like I couldn't get down. It looked so awkward with this ginormous tall body and this little TV. So I had to sort of get creative. So I was like, you know what, this one I'm going to run it horizontal. I'm going to lower the figure down on the level with the TV so it works. So I just don't have this dead space above. So there's a lot that you kind of have to work out in that you sort of discover in that process that's really important. So I think it's definitely something you don't want to skip on, and you don't want to just leave it to finding random images because you just won't get what you want. You really need that. And then it's sort of a process. It's a process too of sort of settling on the images that you want, like ultimately preparing them for what you're going to do. So for example, these were ones that I used in paintings, but it's sort of cropping it down. What's the right ratio going to be? You know, I like these images. And then sometimes they're really true to the image when it comes into the painting. And other times I may say, hey, I don't like the color of this pot, or I don't want, you know, the hook on the wall of my laundry room. And, you know, I take things out and I edit things, but I literally had to think about, what do you see in the salad bowl? Can you see these peppers here? How, you know, all those things go into preparing and doing the photo shoots. And it's
I
actually
noticed you even apparently put a wig on, so you're very intentional about preparing the photographs as being a source for your painting. Is that correct?
I do. And I, you know, I do that often because my hair is long. And so sometimes it just gets in the way, or I want to be able to play with the historical context a little bit and blur that out. But there's a lot of work that goes into it. It's actually really exhausting, which I don't think people realize. It's a lot of work, whether I'm moving furniture around, setting up photography lights, putting the clothes on, whatever it is. And you'll notice in some of them, like, I'm making crazy faces because you're so focused on your body and getting the positioning right, especially when you're the model and the person sort of directing it. There's a lot that goes into that makes it kind of complicated. So.
Yeah. Well, good. We'll get into some of the thematic aspects of your domestics, but first there's a few other questions from students in general sense. What advice would you give to a young artist just starting out in the art world?
Okay. I think one thing I love is when people can really articulate things about their work, right? What are you thinking about? Or are you trying to ask me questions? Are you trying to elicit something or evoke something? Tell me where you're at, because I think that's really one of the ways that people connect with your work, is when you can articulate things to them that then resonate with them. It means so much more. I know for me, when I have a chance to talk to people about my work, they go from liking it maybe to loving it, right? It changes their relationship, or it has so much more meaning to them. So I think in terms of, one, if you're trying to be successful or sell work or show work, that's a really important piece to have. And I think don't expect yourself to fall into sort of your style. I think people get really stressed out. Like, I don't know what my style is. I don't know. I think you have to trust that you sort of grow into your work, that you find that, and that it's okay to have more than one style too, where you can have different series. They can be very different. No one's actually going to stop you. And I had an interesting experience with that. I was getting ready to do a show at the Newport Art Museum in Rhode Island, and the curator came to my house wanting domestics because it was a show about sort of domestic life. And she hadn't seen my desserts. And she came in and was like, wait, I like the desserts too. These also fit in the show. And so I think sometimes we think what might be a negative, or no, they're not the same, so, you know, I shouldn't be doing those. Instead, it was stronger having multiple things. So I think trust that it's okay to do more than one thing, trust that you grow into your work. Just surround yourself with, like, immerse yourself in the art community, surround yourself with a lot of good art, good design, good music, things that are inspiring, things that are influential, that kind of just always be feeding yourself so that you can create
good advice. How do you know what to create? Where do you get your inspiration, and what prompts you to start a new series? You just talked about 2 of your series. I know you have a lot more than that.
You know, my sketchbook is messy. People always think sketchbooks are these places of beautiful, like, preliminary drawings. So this is what my sketchbook pages look like. So for example, this I did sitting on the deck at the beach this summer in North Carolina, contemplating new domestics that I wanted to do. They're very messy. There's a lot of words. There's just all sorts of things going on in here, but it's not necessarily really clean or really formal. It's when I have thoughts, I just try to get them down. I don't care if they're crazy. I don't care if they're silly. There's a lot of things in my sketchbook that never turn into anything, but for me, my process tends to be that I'll have an idea and it's kind of hazy, almost like a dream. And it sort of has to percolate for a little while, or I'll sketch something and then I'm not totally sure. And 6 months later, I'll come back and sketch something similar. And so sometimes it takes a little while, or I know that it's around a certain thing, but it just takes a little time to figure out kind of the parts and pieces or the medium or the approach or exactly what you're doing. So I think too, I sometimes play games with myself, which is, can I create a piece of work that's totally different from my other work that people wouldn't even know was mine? And I like to do that a lot. I like to sort of break out of the constraints of the sort of, your work can almost get a little formulaic when you've been working in the same series for a while. Like, I know I need these colors if I'm doing skin. It can get a little bit boring, and so I like to switch back and forth between series because I think it makes me hungry to go back to the other series, and it kind of keeps me fresh. It makes me bring new things back to those series. And in terms of inspiration, it comes from everywhere. It comes from songs, it comes from images, it comes from interactions. I would say I get a lot from interactions with other people. It comes a lot from social cultural things that I see going on that I want to talk about.
What is the most important thing about your work? What do you want people to take away from seeing your work?
I think that what I want is for them to, I want to ask questions, right? I don't really want to say something so much as I want to prompt thought and discussion and critical thinking. I want people to take on different perspectives and sort of think through those, understand those. I think especially with the domestics and with some others, I like them to be very open-ended. I like a lot of complexity. I like people to come at them from different spaces and all of those to be correct or valid in different ways, and yet sort of be able to be almost contradictory, but hold the same space at the same time. So I really like deep discussion. I like philosophical discussion. I like people to go to deeper emotional spaces. So I like to prompt that with my work.
What do you do to get over artistic blocks? When you don't feel like creating, how do you get out of that rut?
Sometimes I accept that it's real. Like sometimes you're just in a little bit of a funk. And if I try to push it too hard, it doesn't work, right? Like sometimes I know I'm just not feeling it. And if I try to create stuff, I'm just going to create terrible stuff. So sometimes I kind of go a little bit easy on myself because sometimes it's almost like the more you force it, the worse it gets. But if you sort of back off a little bit, it works out better. So I've learned the difference between when I need to sort of double down and when to just walk away and do other things and trust that it's going to come back. Right. So I think playing with different materials, again, sort of leaving like work in some ways or things I know I have to work on and trying to work on just something that's fun or playful, or maybe I'll do something abstract. Sometimes it's making a new playlist or, just kind of immersing myself in other things, making some great food, whatever it is that just sort of opens you back up. But I would say it's not uncommon to sort of have these times where you just feel a little bit artistically frustrated. And sometimes where you don't even love your work. Like some days you're like, I would just like to light a match and walk away from all of it. Right. And then you find your way back through it again and you like it. So it is different. But I would say connection too, or like really connecting with other people, that makes me produce more and better work. So
okay, well, let's talk about some of your specific series and some questions related to that. Your Domestics is probably your best well-known series and one of my personal favorites. And here's some questions related to that. Why do you not show people's faces?
Okay, well, you can see a bunch of them here behind me because I've been working on pieces for an upcoming show. This is a question I always get, and especially when I go to parties and people say, what do you do? And I say, I'm an artist. And they say, what do you paint? And I say, women with no heads doing domestic work. Always a good conversation starter. But I do it for a lot of reasons. I like to obscure the identity of the figure so that it could be multiple people. I also like to create an ambiguity within the pieces. And I like that you don't know what she's thinking or feeling, which allows it to have that tension or sort of multiple meanings. I like that it's the perspective of me that my children see when I'm doing work. You know, if you look from a child height, they're looking at your body, basically. They're seeing what you do. And I like the focus being on work or action rather than the figure. And I think as soon as you see someone's face, you decide, I like them, I don't like them, they're attractive, they're not attractive, I know them, I don't know them. And there's a lot of emotion that goes into that, but not seeing that opens it up a lot more. And I think it allows people to project themselves or other people into the paintings in different ways. Whereas if it was very definitely someone, they don't do that in the same way. And some people say, well, wait, doesn't this sort of reduce the power of the women, right? You're cutting off their heads. You're not showing this like the most personal part of them. And for me, it actually reduces the power of the viewer. So it gives the power to the female figure in terms of she gets to control what she's thinking and feeling, and she's not revealing that. Only if she chooses to reveal that to you do you get to know. But you can look at her, you can judge her however you want, but the most important parts are the parts you're not seeing. Okay. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, one of the students asked about is your themes are about female empowerment, I think referring to this domestic series. And you kind of address that a little bit, giving the power to the woman in the painting, which happens to be you, we now know. And,
yeah. Well, and I think I like that there's a lot of complexity in women's experiences. And I think especially, you know, if you look at these pieces, we're sort of incorporating these objects, we're blurring the historical context. Could it be the 1950s? Could it be now? Could it be anything in between? How different is the story of the woman if it is the 1940s? You know, I first started the series because one day I was sweeping my kitchen. I was wearing an apron that my great grandmother had made. And I thought, wow, I bet she swept her kitchen wearing this same apron. And yet our lives are very, very different, from her being on a farm in Idaho in the 1940s and me living here in 2000, right? In terms of our education, our opportunities, all of our experiences. But yet this task and this setting remained constant. And so I find that women approach these in different ways. I'll have people say, oh, I remember living in this. This was my mother. This was my grandmother. Or I come home from work now and I'm still dressed up and I'm doing the second shift and this is my world. Or I have women who say, I never look like this when I'm doing work at home, but when I see this, it makes me think that the work I'm doing at home is somehow more important than it feels when I'm doing it, right? It gives them a greater sense of power of the work that they're doing. Okay. So I like that it can be a lot of those things all at once. And I think, you know, we talked about stylistically, the simplification, the sort of discrete paint. I like the way that it's ironic in that we're depicting something really complex in a simplified way, which is there isn't a really easy answer to this balance of sort of women's identities, women's roles, cultural expectations of them. So I'm very much a believer in strong women. And so I like these pieces to project that in sometimes really interesting ways.
Okay. You've talked a little bit about some of your interests, and I think one of the interests you have are mid-century kind of illustration and furniture and patterns, and those directly find their ways into your paintings. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I kind of intentionally include, I call them domestic artifacts, right? These objects or pieces into the work to intentionally blur the setting, right? So if I'm using, Tupperware canisters from the 1960s, you recognize those as 1960s. Or a lot of times it's furniture in my house that was, my grandparents or something that, and so I like that. I like the authenticity of it. I like, again, just sort of playing with, I love how those objects looked. And sometimes they have the ability to convey things in different ways. So I use phones a lot in my work, old telephones, but I love the sort of tangible corded phone. And I think living in that era, before voicemail and these things, where if you missed a call, you missed it. Like that was it. There was sort of a permanence to that or a tension in it. And so I love the way that, so for example, I like to use phones as a symbol of power often, like the titles might be She Made the Call, or, things like this that are sort of like, they have these meanings, but I like the way those objects sort of capture things from other times or can be interesting metaphors. So I like to incorporate those a lot. And also sometimes they just have sentimental meaning for me. So I like that the domestic series, I'm taking the pictures in my house, wearing the clothes I wear every day. There's an authenticity. I really like how feminist framework taught us to speak from first person. And so I think I like the way that all sort of goes together in a more real way.
Okay, and you just referenced the title of one of your works. Is there a deeper meaning to your titles?
Yes, the titles are always loaded. So they always have to do with what the figure is actually doing, something about the context, but then they also have to do with other things. So for example, there's one with a woman right there holding a purse, and she's pulling a ticket out of the purse. So her ticket out is the title of the piece. So this could be she's finding a ticket to go to the movies, or it could be she's leaving to go somewhere, or it could be also referring to sort of how education has opened women's opportunities to not necessarily abandonment of domestic life, but opportunities or a greater sense of power or deliberate choice in how they sort of manage their lives. And so everything tends to have titles that sort of have these multiple meanings because I like to create that tension, and I like people to know that I'm not just talking about what she's doing, but there's more discussion that we need to have about what's going on. So one with the phone might be who's there, and obviously she's answering a phone, but it's also about emotional presence, like how present are we in our spaces, like are we really there? So they all play with different issues, usually of sort of psychological, emotional space or cultural identity.
Okay. I notice two of your cake or dessert paintings behind you. What is that series all about?
Okay, so how the dessert pieces started was one day I was painting a domestic and it had a cake in it, and I realized I liked painting the cakes as much as I liked painting the figure. So I was like, why don't I paint a cake? Because I bake all the time. And I liked the way that the cakes could become metaphors for different things in our experience, because I think often still lives are just like, people see it as just a still life. It's just a pretty object, but you can see there's a chocolate cake right there. And that one, it has this wave pattern. And the title is Amid the Ups and Downs, but it's really about resilience and how life, like, it has good parts, it has bad parts. And sort of the pieces speak to that. Or I have another piece, let's see. You can see a piece over here that is a big cake, and it's actually about body image and sort of distortion perceptions of ourselves. So I like the way that these objects can talk about things, or I have one that's about time and how you manage time. And one is titled Glass Ceiling because it's under a dome. So I love that they become representations, these objects. And especially, I think as a woman, these were typically sort of domestic tasks, using these sort of domestic arts to say things about social issues is kind of fun for me. So
I can relate to the up and down when I've had a lot of chocolate cake for dinner during COVID-19. So do you see your desserts as models, and do you use actual desserts? I mean, we know you do the photo shoots for your domestic series. Do you do the same thing for your dessert series?
oh yes, so my desserts are models, and I do photo shoots for them as well. So let's see here. We'll
You know, show us some.
share.
Great.
I'll show you a picture here. So wait. Sometimes, when you want to share and it's trying to tell me something else. Okay, here we go. Share. So here's examples of 2 cakes set up in photo shoots. So you can see how glamorous and real this is, because this is real life of artists. This one with the strawberries on top, the pattern in the background was actually the wrapping paper. My grandparents used to own a fabric store in Idaho in the 1940s and 50s. And they would wrap all of the packages from the store. They had these big bolts of this wrapping paper. And so as a child, it was always the wrapping paper that they had left over that our Christmas presents always came wrapped in. So it was like this thing that I always connected with them. And I always loved the pattern, and I had a scrap of it, and I was like, I want to incorporate this into something. So I, put it on a board and set it all up. But no, I pick the patterns, I make the cake, we get to eat the cakes. What was really fun was when I did a show with these, 2 different times I've shown the dessert series. For the openings, I've actually made the cakes. So we have the actual cake in front of the paintings of the cake, and then everyone gets to eat the cakes, and it's such a different interaction with the work and then talking about the work, and it's so much fun. So I love it. It's real. I sometimes make my kids stand behind there and hold different fabrics until I find which ones I like. And I know there's ways to prop it up, but I used to prop up a board, and then one day they were running through the kitchen and knocked it into one of the cakes, and it smashed the cake. And so now I guess so that's what it looks like. And
can you show us, I noticed some pictures of the process, how you work from the photographs, a little bit about your process of how you use the photographs. I think I saw your kids transferring.
Oh yeah, okay. So
is that all right?
Yeah, we can go there. We can go to that.
Because I think there's often the idea from our students that traditionally working from photography and projecting it is not cool. But I think you need to demystify that and show us that that's okay. That's the way that many artists have worked for many, many years, right? Even the camera obscura was used by Renaissance artists, and there's a lot of evidence they trace from that as well. So can you show us and talk to that?
Totally. So let's see here. So here you can see my 2 boys holding fabric. Don't they look excited? This was during COVID when I was working on some pieces for Delta. So you can see we have the photography lights out. I mean, honey's never been so exciting, right? But this is sort of this is what it's like when you're an artist. It's not like you have some magic space that, is all set up for you. You have to create photo shot areas within what you have. I have this great glossy white table, and so it's perfect for doing this series. So it's sort of a process like this. So here is a picture of actually my son North, who is Stop, come back, stop. Okay, who is in high school, and he was working on these drawing up for me. So this was a 7-foot piece I was working on for the airport. And for this series, I use projection because it's the fastest way for me to get the basic block of the forms up onto the canvas. And it's not really where I need to spend my time. I mean, I could spend a long time drawing that, but for what I'm looking for in the piece, I want a fair amount of precision. I want a fair amount of realism. I'm not looking to make the figures more expressive or interpretive. The place where I'm going to get interpretive is with the color and with other things. So it's sort of knowing what you want to do with the work and then deciding what's the best way to get there. Because as an artist too, there's an efficiency factor, right? If this can be drawn up in an hour, or if I'm sketching it by hand and having to check all my angles, check all my proportions, make sure, because especially on a 7-foot painting, right, you get off and you could spend days and days redrawing all of these elements to get them on there. So I will hire studio assistants to help with this part because it's not cheating. And I would say most artists use various forms of transfer. Or have people do their underpaintings. People use charcoal transfers, people do carbon transfers, people do ink, they're making large photocopies of their sketches. I use an old school transparency. That's actually my favorite. Like I use like clear transparency, right? And I like that best in terms of controlling it. Other people use digital things, but that's the approach that works for me because I used to draw them all by hand. And one day I was like, this is adding so much time to this process. There has to be a better way. And I think, for this series, that's the best way to do it, right? It allows you to focus on the parts that you want to focus on. Now, if I wanted distortion in my figures, right? Because sometimes that's what we want. We don't want them to look just like that. Then I wouldn't use that technique.
Okay, great. And obviously there's a long tradition of artists using other people to point up and work up, whether it be sculptures or paintings. And it's right. I mean, and ultimately you need to know how to draw well to be able to, and paint well to be able to interpret the information that's even traced onto a canvas or transferred over in some way. Let's speak a little bit about medium. You paint in acrylic. What is it you like about acrylic paints?
I love acrylic paints. Sometimes people try to act like acrylics aren't as good as oils or things like this. People are very, have strong feelings about mediums, but I love acrylics. They are definitely my home base. I love them for their color. I love them for the speed, as someone whose career really evolved out of balancing time painting with children. It's pretty safe to have around small children. It's fast. If somebody touched it 2 minutes later, it's not all over my house. So there are a lot of practical reasons why acrylics are a good fit for me. I think if you know your personality, you often know what mediums work well for you. Like if you're a super planner type, maybe watercolors are your thing, or if you're a perfectionist, maybe oils are a really good fit because you can just keep working and working. I really like flexibility. I like speed. I like color. So I really love the way that acrylics give me all of those things. Okay.
So, what is it like when a painting unfolds? You showed a few slides about transferring it, but I mean, do you block things in? What does it look like as the painting starts to take shape?
Okay, so it comes as a process, right? It starts slowly. So, for example, we have North here drawing up. This is the image that he was working off of. But even then, you'll see that the painting doesn't totally turn out like this. I changed colors. I made it nighttime, which changes a lot of things in the piece. I have to change the reflections in the water glasses. I have to change, there's a lot that goes into it. So even a study shot doesn't set things in stone. It sort of just gives you a space to work from. So it'll start with blocking it in. People always assume too that you paint it once and it's done, and it's not, right? Every area in my paintings are probably painted with at least 3 layers of paint, some maybe like 7 or 8. So oftentimes I'm sort of laying in the darks and the lights first, and it sort of kind of evolves. You'll see my paints all over the floor. I paint on the floor, so and then that's the piece when it's done. So it's sort of a process. Paintings go through really awkward stages for all of us. I think I teach at a museum here, and my students are often like, wait, my painting looks terrible. And I think most of the time it's just your painting isn't done yet, right? You've put down 1 coat of paint. It doesn't have the detail. It doesn't have the contrast. It's not built up enough yet. It looks weak, right? So I think a lot of times, and there's processes of just working things out. It just takes time to figure it out. So for example, I was working on a piece last night and I've gone back and forth. The carpet is blue now in this piece, right? Okay. So the carpet is blue now. It was blue at first, and then it was gray, and then it was blue again because I didn't like the gray. So there's these processes of working things out. Or for example, here's where I'm painting today. Here's this cake that's in process, but you can see the whites look weak because I do gray underneath, and the pink is just starting to block in. So early on, everything kind of looks not great yet. People always think, oh, because you're an artist and this is what you do, that it just looks amazing from the first moment that you put paint on the canvas. And it doesn't. It goes through these awkward stages, and you just kind of keep working it out, and you kind of find what works. But it's a lot of layers. It's a lot of time.
Okay.
That I think too often we judge paintings, we sort of rush them. We expect them to be too good too fast, right?
So that little shot you showed of on the floor, that's how you paint? You paint sprawled out on the floor, flat?
Yes.
So the image of an artist working an easel, is it out of comfort? Is it the dimension of the canvases? I mean, what dictates that? Or
okay, so yeah, people will come into my studio and they'll be like, wait, where's your easel? Where do you paint? And I'm like, I paint on the floor, which for someone in their 40s is probably unusual. But for me, I really like to paint flat. So I do have a desk. So sometimes, because for me, it's more comfortable to paint this way than this way. This is just harder for me. I don't know. Maybe it's because I grew up like in high school. I always stood at tables and painted. I don't know. And I paint pretty big. And so I'm constantly like turning the canvas around to get access to the parts that I want. And again, with acrylics, they dry fast. So unlike oils where you have to be, concerned that you're not touching the canvas constantly and smearing things around, I can generally touch the canvas anywhere because it's dry. And so you can kind of get a different precision when your hand is weighted against it, right? And you're sort of dragging your brush. It allows that cleaner technique for me than if I'm painting like this, right? Your hands, you're trying to keep it steady, but there's a different bracing when I'm painting flat. So, and I'm pretty much always painting on the floor. So I think again, people think there's like one right way to paint, and there isn't. It's what works for you. If you want to paint sitting, standing up, laying down, whatever. I leave like trails of paints all across the studio because I'll keep like pushing the canvas further out of the way of all the paints that I have all over the floor. So that's how I paint.
Interesting. How long does a typical painting take you? Like a 30 by 40?
I would say anywhere from maybe 9 to 12 hours, maybe. I mean, it's interesting because there's a funny thing about paintings, which is the first like 80% of the painting is done in maybe the first half of the time. Like in 4 hours, the painting is 80% done, but the last 4 hours are completing like that last 20%. So the other night I was working on a piece and I was like, it's mostly done, right? It's because it looked mostly done. It just had all the little detail work left. Well, 5 hours later, it was actually done. And I was like, wait, what was I thinking that was mostly done? That was halfway done, right? But so sometimes they're deceiving in that, you know, if you really get into them close, there's a lot that has to go. But my favorite part is starting paintings. My least favorite part is finishing painting. So.
Well, another question relates to that. How do you know when it's finished?
Oh, this is a good question because no one really knows this. This is like one of the questions of the universe, right? I often say it's done enough, or I'll say the other day I was sending a picture to someone when I finished and I was like, done, ... I think, right? Because you don't totally know. You kind of get to a point where it feels like you've kind of addressed everything, but I have to kind of sit with them and stare at them. For me, painting always has a staring phase where I sit and just have to look at it and make sure everything's working, that nothing's super bothering me. I'm not a crazy perfectionist, so I am just like, nope, it is what it is, or it's conveying enough of what I want to convey. And sometimes you really, I think, especially when you're doing it professionally, you have to decide what its role is, or, you know, like how I have other things I want to work on too. So you kind of have to decide how much power you give it and what you want it to be. But I think knowing when something is done, you can also ask other people, right? I think, you know, oftentimes my husband or my kids or someone will come in the studio and they kind of stand over what I'm working on. And then they're like, that doesn't look like the leg is right. Or, you know, they'll say something. Sometimes I'm like, don't say anything because I want to be done with this piece. But I think other people sometimes do give you important feedback that helps you know, is it working? Is it conveying what you want it to convey? Is there any part of it that's disruptive to someone else that maybe you're not wanting to be disruptive? So.
Okay. Well, that's a good point, and that's a good reason for people to have a tribe around you that support you and give you honest feedback. You want that. And maybe one last question, you know, and maybe it's a comment and then you can respond to it. You know, I look at artists' work and I always try to see, especially with all the different series you've done, color and pattern seems to be predominantly a very, very important elements in your work. Do you want to speak to that? Why you think that's what draws you? I mean, throughout your series, that's fairly consistent.
Right. I would say that's probably like, even if you saw work that's from very different series, if you look at it long enough, the color is probably the first thing that would give away that they're all mine. And discrete color, right? That's probably my most signature trademark thing. I love just the conveyance of color. And it's funny because I think artists are sort of color, well, some of us are like color nerds. Like there are colors that I'm so in love with, like certain paint colors, because they're so incredibly beautiful. Or some days you'll make a paint color that you've never made before. And it's amazing how subtle the differences are between colors. I sometimes wish people could watch a painting unfold, because I talk about how they're often painted in layers. I tend to paint in more sort of a sequence of thin layers of paint. And sometimes it's like, it's a fine tuning approach. So the first layer is roughly what I want. Then the second one is maybe like, no, I want it just a little cooler, or just a little warmer, just a little grayer. And to really nail those color relationships, it's amazing how subtle it is. Like if you were to see the two piles of wet paint, or someone else were to see them, they would probably not be able to differentiate the two. But once you put it over a large area on the canvas, that tiniest step, right, it was like on this blue skirt that I was working on in a painting, it was very icy. And I put the second coat down, and the second coat got a little too like robin egg blue. And I was like, no, it needs to go back to the iciness because of the energy that it then has in relation to the other colors, or to complement or different things in the piece. So that the precision of a color, I think, is really interesting to me, the way that the color plays with each other or evokes energy or feeling or just those relationships. So I'm drawn to that a lot. That color speaks to me a lot. So.
Right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Leslie. And I think your work, as students start to look at it and teachers also can see a lot of different series and exploration, especially our advanced students are doing that on their own and their AP projects, can be inspired by your work and see how you can consistently work on a theme and still have a lot of breadth of exploration, even sometimes with the same size that you tend to use a very common proportional relationship. So thank you so much for your time.
Welcome. Thanks.